In the summer of 2021, every combine in Pembina County, Manitoba, stopped moving on the same morning. This was not a decision any of them made. It was the kind of thing that happens when you build a system that depends on a single point of contact with the sky, and then the sky stops cooperating. The harvest window in southern Manitoba is not something you negotiate with. You get roughly 10 days in late August and early September when the canola is dry enough to cut, the ground is firm enough to carry equipment, and the weather has not yet decided to remind you who is actually in charge. Miss that window and you are watching your yield deteriorate in the swath. Every farmer in Pembina County understood this the way they understood the shape of their own land. It was not a lesson you learned once. It was a lesson the country taught you every year in different ways until it became part of how you thought. That summer, the county's newer combines were running full RTK auto-steering systems. The precision harvest technology had come into the region fast over the previous 6 years, pushed hard by the dealerships in Winkler and Morden, sold on the promise of tighter swath-to-swath margins, reduced overlap, and the ability to run through the night without a driver losing the line in the dark. The systems were good. Nobody argued that they weren't good. They reduced grain losses at the header. They kept the combine tracking true through fields that rolled and curved in ways that tired drivers couldn't hold. The farmers who had bought them ran cleaner cuts and went home with less left standing in the corners. On the morning of August 26th, a GPS satellite correction service used by 3 of the county's 4 precision agriculture networks experienced a synchronization failure during a firmware update. The failure cascaded through the correction signal infrastructure across a wide band of the northern plains. By 6:15 in the morning, the auto-steer systems on every affected combine were throwing accuracy warnings. By 7:40, the guidance had locked out entirely on most machines. The combines were running. The engines were warm. The crop was ready, but the systems that told the machines where they were and where they needed to go had gone quiet, and the newer operators, the ones who had learned to farm in the era of satellite guidance, were sitting in cabs that had suddenly become much smaller than they felt an hour before. Some of them tried to run manually. A younger farmer named Tyler Cron, who had taken over his family's section north of Morden 2 years earlier, made 3 passes before he realized he was overlapping badly enough to leave uncut strips between rounds. He stopped. A woman named Sandra Friesen, who ran 1,000 acres of canola west of Altona, tried to use the old light bar on her backup unit, but she hadn't touched it in 4 years and couldn't calibrate it to the current field boundaries in time to matter. She stopped too. By 9 in the morning, most of the county's GPS-guided combines were sitting at the field edge. The precision agriculture dealer out of Winkler, a man named Craig Dorkson, was fielding calls from 6 different customers and driving between farms trying to explain what had happened and what he knew about when the correction signal would be restored. The service provider was saying 12 to 24 hours. In a harvest window that measured its value in single days, that was not an acceptable answer. Let me tell you about Dorothea Neufeld, because you need to understand who she was before you can understand what she did that morning. Dorothea was 53 years old in the summer of 2021 and had farmed the same 640 acres her parents had broken in Pembina County since she was old enough to drive a tractor down a furrow. Her father, Abram Neufeld, had come to that land from a Mennonite community in the Interlake in 1971, drawn south by the heavier soil and the slightly longer season, and had spent 30 years learning everything the land was willing to teach. Her mother, Tina, had kept the books, handled the grain contracts, and raised 3 children while maintaining the kind of calm relationship with uncertainty that farming in Manitoba requires of anyone who intends to last. Dorothea had taken over the operation in 2009, 2 years after her father's stroke, when it became clear that the farm needed someone who could get into the cab every morning and someone who could see the whole financial picture at the same time. She was both. She had a diploma in agricultural business from the University of Manitoba and 30 years of muscle memory for everything her father had ever shown her. She was not the kind of farmer who went to producer meetings and spoke first. She was the kind who sat near the back, listened to everything, and asked the one question at the end that nobody else had thought to ask. She had watched the precision agriculture revolution come into Pembina County with the same measured attention she gave to everything. She had read the research from the Winnipeg agronomy offices. She had been to the demonstrations in Brandon. She had looked at the numbers carefully, the way her father had taught her to look at numbers, which meant looking at them from all directions, including the ones that didn't appear in the brochure. She had not bought the full RTK autosteer package for her combine when she replaced the machine in 2018. She had bought the combine. She had bought the yield monitor. She had bought the header control system. She had not bought the guidance package, not because she couldn't justify the cost, though $42,000 for a full precision guidance retrofit on a machine she already ran cleanly was a number she had looked at a long time. She hadn't bought it because she had spent the summer of 2012 watching what happened to American farmers during the RTK outage that went through the northern plains that year, and she had filed that away the way she filed things, not with drama, but with a specific kind of attention to what it meant for her own operation. Her combine was a 2018 model. She had named nothing because she had learned from her father not to name equipment unless you were prepared to keep it forever. It had a Green Star yield monitor mounted on the dash and a paper field map taped to the left window pillar and a swath guiding system her father had rigged up in the 90s that she had never taken off because it still worked. The system was simple. A pair of crop dividers welded to a frame at the front of the header with a sightline bar running back to the cab, giving the operator a physical reference point for the edge of the standing crop. You lined up the bar with the crop edge. You drove toward a fixed reference at the far end of the field. You made small corrections. When you turned around, you came back on the uncut side and lined up again. Her father had called it keeping your eye on the end of the field. He had learned it from his own father, who had harvested with a binder and a team and could not have afforded to waste an inch of standing grain. The principle was the same regardless of the machinery. Let me tell you about the swath guiding system, because most operators under 45 have never used one and don't think about what it actually requires. And it is the reason this story goes the way it does. The system asks you to look forward, not down. It asks you to pick a fixed point at the far end of the field, a hydro pole, a grain bin corner, a fence post, and to drive toward that point continuously, making the small constant corrections that keep the header aligned with the crop edge. You feel the drift before you see it. You correct before it becomes a problem. There is no satellite telling you where you are. There is you, the machine, and the crop, and the three of them have to stay in agreement through every pass. Dorothea Neufeld had been running her machine this way for 23 years. She was very good at it. On the morning of August 26th, while the county's GPS-guided combines were sitting at field edges waiting for a correction signal, Dorothea pulled her combine out of the yard at 6:30 and drove to her north field, where the canola had been swathed 10 days earlier and was ready to pick up. She had checked the moisture that morning. It was at 11%. The ground was carrying. The weather was holding. There was no reason not to be in the field. She did not know about the satellite outage. She would learn about it that afternoon when her neighbor, a younger farmer named Edvin Harder, who farmed the section to her east, drove past on the township road and slowed down when he saw her making passes. He pulled in at the field approach and waited for her to come around. When she got close enough for him to roll down his window, he asked her how she was running. She said she was running fine. He told her about the outage, about the guidance lockouts, about the combine sitting idle across the county. She had not heard she had been in the field since 7. She was on her 11th pass. Let me tell you about what was happening at the Friesen Co-op in Altona that same morning, because that is where the other part of this story lives. The co-op was where the county's farmers came when they weren't in the field, and on the morning of August 26th, with the harvest window sitting open and half the county's combines parked, there were more trucks in the lot than a Wednesday morning would normally see. The farmers were not in a good mood. Harvest anxiety in southern Manitoba has a particular texture. It is not the angry frustration of something going wrong on a single day, but the quiet, grinding dread of watching time leave without you, knowing that weather in August can change in ways that cost you everything you spent the spring building. Craig Dorkson was there. He was 41 years old and had been selling precision agriculture equipment in the region for 9 years. He was good at it. He understood the technology genuinely, not just as a salesman understands something, but as a person who found the engineering genuinely interesting. He had sold precision guidance packages to 47 operations in Pembina County since 2016, and those operations ran cleaner and more efficiently because of it. He believed in what he sold. He was at the co-op because he had already been to 3 farms that morning and had run out of things to say other than wait for the signal. He was explaining the cascading failure, explaining that the satellite infrastructure itself was fine, that it was a correction signal problem, that it would be resolved. He said it with the particular patience of someone who has gone over the same ground enough times that the emotional work of saying it had separated from the technical content. One of the farmers, a younger woman named Kayla Bergen, who had bought a precision package 2 seasons ago and had never cut a field without it, asked him what she was supposed to do with a combine that wouldn't steer itself. Craig was the one who mentioned what Edvin had told him on the phone an hour earlier. He said it almost as context, not as a suggestion. Edvin Harder said Dorothea Neufeld's been running since 7 this morning. She's not on the guidance system, never bought it, runs her old crop divider sightline her dad set up. He paused. She'll probably be done with the north field by afternoon. The room was quiet for a moment. Then a man named Ron Wiebe, who had bought the top-line guidance package the previous season and had been one of the louder voices in the parking lot about what the outage was costing him, said something that came out as a laugh but wasn't quite one. What is she running? A 90s setup. That's not the same as precision guidance. You can't get the same header overlap control without the auto steer. He looked around for confirmation. A few people nodded. A few didn't. Have you ever seen someone reject a solution not because it didn't work, but because accepting it would mean admitting that the expensive thing they bought might not be the only way to do the job? That is a specific kind of thinking, and it is not unique to farming, and it is not unique to any particular generation. It is what happens when the cost of something becomes part of your identity, so that questioning the cost feels like questioning yourself. Ron Wiebe was not wrong that auto-steer precision guidance outperformed a crop divider sightline on a good day with a good signal. He was right about that, but a good day with a good signal was not the day they were having. Edvin Harder drove back out to Dorothea's field in the early afternoon. She was on her 28th pass by then, running at the pace she always ran during harvest, which was steady and without wasted motion, the combine moving through the swath the way a person moves through familiar territory, not in a hurry, not in a rush, but not stopping either. Edvin pulled up to the field approach and watched for a while. Then he called out when she came around. She shut down the header and climbed down. He told her what had been said at the co-op about the guidance system sitting idle, about Ron Wiebe's comment. Dorothea listened to all of it. She pushed her hat back and looked at her field for a moment, at the cut rows running straight from where they stood to the far tree line. "The canola doesn't know who told the combine where to go," she said. "It just knows whether it got cut on time." She climbed back up and started the header. Let me tell you about the next 4 days, because they are the part of this story that made it worth telling. The correction signal came back online the following evening, about 30 hours after the failure. The county's GPS-guided combines went back to the field, and by the end of August 28th, most of the operations that had lost a day and a half were back on pace. The window had not closed. It had compressed, and in the compression there were costs, but nothing that couldn't be absorbed. Dorothea Neufeld finished her 640 acres on August 30th. She had run for 4 days, starting before first light and stopping when it was too dark to see the crop edge clearly, which in late August in Manitoba meant stopping around 9:30 and starting again at 5:45. Her header losses, measured after the fact with the standard drop test her father had taught her to do after every other field, were within the same tolerance range she had been achieving for 20 years. Her swath spacing was consistent. The canola went into the bin at 11.4% moisture, clean, on time, exactly where it needed to be. The county noticed, not loudly. Pembina County was not a county that celebrated things with noise. But the farmers who drove past her fields on the township roads in the days after harvest, looking the way farmers look at finished fields, could read what the rows said. They were straight, not precision guidance straight, but straight in the way that experienced operators make straight rows. Straight enough that the header had tracked true all the way through, that the canola had come off without leaving strips, that the job had been done correctly on the days when it needed to be done. Ron Wiebe drove past her north field on September 2nd on his way to the elevator in Altona. He slowed down. He kept driving. Craig Dorkson drove out to Dorothea's farm on the second Thursday of October. The harvest was done, the bins were full, the equipment was going through its post-season maintenance. He found Dorothea in the shop doing exactly what she did every October, going through the combine header row by row, checking the knife sections, replacing the guards that needed replacing, the way her father had done it and his father before him. She looked up when he came in. She did not say anything. She waited. "I want to ask you something," Craig said. He said it plainly, without the jacket confidence he carried in the field. Not as a salesman, just as someone trying to understand something. She set down the guard she was holding. "Okay, how do you keep the header aligned without guidance? How do you actually do it, pass after pass without drifting?" Dorothea was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Come here." She walked him to the shop door and pointed out toward the north field, which was bare now, the stubble running in rows toward the tree line that marked the north property boundary. "You see that stand of ash at the far corner?" Craig nodded. "That's my point. Every pass in that field I'm driving toward one specific gap between the 2 tallest trees. I don't look at the ground in front of me. I look at the gap. My hands make the corrections automatically because my eye is already at the end of the field." She paused. "And the dividers tell me where the crop edge is. The point tells me where I'm going, both things at once." Craig looked at the tree line for a long time. Then he said, "That's what the auto steer does. It gives you the point and the edge reference at the same time, automatically." "Yes," Dorothea said. and it does it better than I can on a clear day with a clean signal. She looked at him, but it doesn't do it on the day the signal goes away, and I've been farming long enough to know that those days come. She walked back into the shop and picked up the guard she'd set down. The system you sell is a good system. I'm not arguing that. My argument isn't with the technology. My argument is with the assumption that the technology is the only thing between you and not being able to do the job. Craig drove back to Winkler that afternoon with something he hadn't had when he drove out, which was a specific and uncomfortable clarity about the difference between a system that improves performance and a system that replaces a skill. They were not the same thing, and he had been selling them as if they were. He did not stop selling precision guidance. The equipment worked, and his customers needed it, and the county was better for it being there. But he started asking a different question at the start of every sales conversation that fall. He started asking whether the operator had ever run the machine without the guidance, whether they knew in their hands and their eyes what the machine was doing when the satellite wasn't helping. Most of them didn't. He started suggesting they find out. Let me tell you about what happened at the Manitoba Agriculture Regional Producer Meeting in Carman in the winter of 2022, because the story does not end in Dorothea's shop. The regional agronomist that year was a man named Paul Sawatsky, who had been covering the Pembina and Red River Valley regions for 14 years and had spent those years watching the adoption of precision agriculture with the analytical patience of someone who was paid to notice what actually happened rather than what was supposed to happen. He had been compiling the 2021 harvest data from across his region, and he had found something in the numbers he wanted to think about carefully before he talked about it in public. The operations that had lost harvest time to the guidance outage had, on average, pushed their harvest completion 2 to 3 days later than the operations that had either not been affected or had been able to run through the outage. In southern Manitoba in late August and early September, 2 days of harvest delay in a year, when rain came on September 3rd, translated to real spoiler pickup in the swath and real quality loss at the elevator. The affected operations had not failed. They had taken a hit that could be measured, that had a dollar value, and that would not appear on any line in the case for precision guidance adoption. Paul put that number in his winter newsletter. He did not name Dorothea Neufeld. He did not write about crop divider sight lines or ash trees at the end of a field. He wrote about harvest timeliness, about the relationship between technology dependence and operational resilience, and about the value of understanding, at a mechanical and practical level, what your equipment is doing when its electronic systems are not available. He wrote it in the dry, careful language that agronomists use when they want farmers to take something seriously without feeling like they're being lectured. The newsletter went to 412 producers in the region. Dorothea read it at her kitchen table on a February morning and looked at it for a while and then went back to the financial record she had been working through. But 5 producers called the regional office that winter asking about manual operation techniques for their combines. Paul Sawatsky referred 2 of them to Dorothea Neufeld. One of those 2 was Kayla Bergen, who had been at the co-op on the morning of August 26th and had asked Craig Dorkson what she was supposed to do with a combine that wouldn't steer itself. Kayla was 29 years old and had been farming on her own for 3 years after taking over her parents' operation near Winkler. She was good with machinery in the way people who grow up around equipment are good. She could diagnose a hydraulic problem by sound and had rebuilt her own header twice. But she had learned to harvest with guidance and had never harvested without it. and the morning of the outage had left her with a specific kind of unsettled feeling that she had not entirely resolved. She drove out to Dorothea's farm on a Tuesday in March when the fields were still under snow, and there was nothing urgent pulling at either of them. Dorothea made coffee, and they sat at the kitchen table, and Dorothea walked her through the sightline system, the principles of it, the way attention had to be held, the kind of fatigue it created that was different from the fatigue of running autosteer, and the way that fatigue lessened over time as the physical pattern became automatic. Kayla asked a lot of questions. She asked them the way someone asks questions when they are not satisfied with partial answers. At the end of the afternoon, she asked if she could come back in August and run a few passes before the main harvest started. Dorothea said yes. Let me tell you about the harvest of 2022, because it is where the story turns forward. Kayla Bergen came out to Dorothea's farm on the first morning of harvest, before the sun was fully up, and stood at the end of the north field and watched Dorothea make the first 3 passes. She watched where Dorothea's eyes went. She watched the small hand movements, the corrections that came almost before the drift, the way the combine tracked true despite having nothing electronic telling it where the crop edge was. She watched the header sitting steady in the swath, cutting clean. After 3 passes, she climbed up. The first pass was not Dorothea's first pass. The header drifted twice, and Kayla corrected both times, but the corrections were late, and she could feel the difference between what she was doing and what Dorothea had been doing. When she came back and climbed down and looked at the pass, she stood there and ran her eye down the length of it for a moment. "Okay," she said. "I see what I'm doing wrong." She went home and put the crop dividers and the sight bar back onto her own machine that week. She had taken them off 2 seasons ago because she thought she didn't need them anymore. She kept her precision guidance. She was not Dorothea Neufeld, and she was not trying to be, but she had a backup, and the backup was calibrated, and she understood how to use it. In August of 2022, the RTK signal held through the entire harvest season without interruption, and Kayla Bergen used her autosteer guidance every day, and did not need the manual sightline system, but it was there and ready, and she had run enough passes to know what her hands needed to do when the satellite wasn't helping. Let me tell you one last thing about Dorothea Neufeld, because there is one more piece. In the spring of 2023, Dorothea's son-in-law, a man named Patrick Broski, who had been farming with her for 2 years after marrying her daughter Simone, sat down with her in the shop one evening and asked her something that had been sitting in his mind since the previous harvest. Patrick was 34 and had come to the farm from a large commercial operation near Brandon, where he had spent 6 years running equipment that made Dorothea's combine look modest. He was technically fluent with precision agriculture in the way that young operators who have grown up with it are fluent. He could troubleshoot a guidance calibration failure from the cab. He knew the system architecture in a way that most operators didn't. What he didn't know, and what the past 2 years had been teaching him, slowly and in the way that farms teach things, which is sideways, and at inconvenient moments, was how to read the crop without a screen telling him what was happening. He asked Dorothea, "When you're running without the guidance, how do you know if you're getting all of it? How do you know you're not leaving grain in the cut?" Dorothea was quiet for a moment. "You feel it," she said, "in the steering, in the sound of the header, in the way the straw comes out the back." She looked at him. "The machine tells you, you just have to be listening." Patrick put the crop dividers on his own header that spring and ran the first field of the season without the guidance. His rows were not as clean as Dorothea's. By the second field, they were better. By the fourth, he had stopped thinking about whether he was doing it right and had started doing it. He put the guidance back on for the main season. He left the crop dividers on the header. In late August of 2023, a localized signal dropout caused by a software conflict in a base station upgrade left a 2-hour window in the middle of his second harvest day where the guidance dropped out entirely. He switched to manual and kept running. His wife came out to the field at lunch and found the combine still moving, the rows straight, the swath going up clean. She called Dorothea. "Tell him his rows are straight," Dorothea said. She paused. "Tell him the canola doesn't care who told the combine where to go." Dorothea Neufeld still farms her 640 acres in Pembina County. She updated her combine 2 seasons ago to a newer model with a full precision guidance package because the technology had reached a point where the value was clear and the cost was right, and she had no good argument against it. The crop dividers and the sight bar are still on the header. Patrick calibrated them to the new machine himself with a tape measure and a level and an afternoon in the yard, the way Dorothea had shown him. Her granddaughter is 7 years old and has already been in the cab during harvest, sitting on Dorothea's knee with her hands on the wheel on the long straight passes, learning to look at the gap in the ash trees at the far end of the north field and to feel the drift before it happens and to make the small corrections that keep the machine honest. The GPS outage of August 2021 cost Pembina County's affected operations somewhere between 1 and 3 days of harvest time, depending on how close they were to the field edge before they stopped. 3 days in a Manitoba harvest window is not nothing. It is the kind of loss that doesn't show up in a single year's numbers but accumulates in the body of a farmer who has learned that every day the window is open is a day you do not get back. One operation in Pembina County kept running that morning. Its rows were straight. Its crop came off on time. In a harvest that hit rain on September 3rd, the 2 days of margin that operation maintained over the county average were the difference between going to the elevator with clean grain and going to the elevator with a drying bill. Some knowledge does not become obsolete. It waits. It sits in a set of crop dividers on a header, in the memory of where the gap in the ash trees is at the far end of a field, in the habit of looking forward instead of down, in the discipline of making small corrections before they become large ones. The canola doesn't know who told the combine where to go. It just knows whether it got cut on time.